Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Bahman Yazdanfar and it is Turnaround, the weekly show for the businesses and the organizations who wish to have some positive changes in their structure. Today we have a guest and I ask him to introduce himself because it's very difficult to go with his name. I should say Paraic.
Paraic, that's
yes.
excellent.
Okay.
Excellent, my good man.
Okay.
This is the hardest part.
It was the hardest part, especially for the confusion.
It's smooth sailing for you.
Would you please introduce yourself a little bit for full name and tell us a little bit about your background so our audience and we know who we are listening to
Sure.
and why.
I'm tempted to say that I was born at the age of 25 with nicotine stains on my fingers and a taste for strong whiskey.
Okay.
But it's actually not true. Paraic is actually, Paraic Lally is my name. Paraic's an Irish version of Patrick. You see?
Okay.
So if you were in Ireland, and you said Paraic, 10 people would turn around and respond.
It is that popular.
It's that popular.
Okay.
But apparently not here.
That is why I had a difficulty.
That's exactly right. So not to worry, not to worry.
So we had to dispel that immediately.
What do you do for a living?
Actually, I work in the construction field.
Okay.
So I've worked in areas sort of energy efficiency. I worked in the manufacturing side, and now I actually work for a water efficiency company. So most of my say professional background is in sales, marketing, talking to designers, architects, and things like that about solutions. The other sort of part of this thing is my interest in philosophy, or what started out really as a pretty strong interest in philosophy. And I was part of an organization that had practical philosophical leaning, but it actually had its roots in economics and economics and justice.
Okay.
So that's some of the stuff we want to talk about. I want to talk about today, but it's basically it was a system of understanding around economics that really was being looked at by a group of people following, in this case, the recession, the huge Great Recession that took place in the 20s. And the huge fallout after that.
Okay.
And so people were trying to understand what happened, what went wrong, what could potentially be different, and what would that look like. And of course it morphed then later not just into economics but philosophy as well. Because the basic idea was you can have a decent system. There are systems of understanding, systems of economics that are fair, but unless people have an appreciation of justice and how it comes together, and a comprehension. So it's kind of like Einstein said one time. He said, you can never solve a problem at the same level of, say, understanding or consciousness that you created the problem with. You have to try to figure it out from a different level.
Different angle, actually.
So that's where the sort of confluence took place. So I developed a very strong interest then in what you would call economic justice.
And what is this something, some phrase for that? Are you talking about geoeconomic?
So geoeconomics is a phraseology. So it's an economics that you could say is essentially tied to land, natural resources, or the things of the earth, right? So it's a very fundamental, and I think, in my view, quite comprehensive in its understanding, but it's also an economics that I think addresses some of the major issues we're having today, the primary one being inequality, right? That's what we're all just talking about.
Are you talking about inequality or are you talking about disparity?
Oh.
Because not both the same.
Yeah, well, so
translated in the same way.
Yeah. So the basic idea that we're seeing concentrations, larger and larger concentrations of wealth in small and smaller number of hands, and obviously that has consequences, right?
Which we are feeling right now.
Which we're feeling right now. And I mean, the other side of it obviously is in the latter part of the last 30 years, and it's very apropos this week, is the whole idea of sustainability as well. you know. So we can't have an economic system that ignores sustainability, that ignores the environment. You know, we have a consumption model today, right? Consume, 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 more, grow. But that doesn't necessarily jive with the reality of our world today.
For our viewers, before we continue to details of that, can you just sum up what is the frame of this geoeconomic is? What is the pillars of this and how is differs from system like Keynesian economic sense?
Yeah, well, there are elements of it actually in the economy today. So recently, Alberta came out with an idea of a carbon tax, right?
Okay.
And BC has adopted that. A carbon tax is a version of this. It's not the core of it, but it's a reflection. It's a reflection of this. And another, say, reflection of it would be what I would call land value. So we'll start there. So what I'll just back up a little bit. Probably a very strong proponent of what I'm talking about here, and probably the best known proponent was a man by the name of Henry George. And
Who created this?
He didn't necessarily create this. The ideas have existed for a very long time. The French, I guess the physiocrats way back when understood this well. It was well understood by lots of people, you know, people like, you know, Tolstoy, Churchill, John Dewey, Paine. A variety of people throughout history were very, what I would call, in tune with this understanding. George really was alive at a time in the 1800s, the latter part of the 1800s. He had a very interesting background. He left home very young, sort of traveled around the world on sort of merchant ships, and then ended up in San Francisco working in a newspaper office, and later started to write. And he was very much on the realm of, he was very much an activist and very much in the realm of what I would call economic justice. And the question that sort of came to him at that time was, as America was growing and wealth production and creation was increasing rapidly as people were moving into cities, so you're getting greater and greater creation of wealth, yet you were getting something that hadn't been there before, which was also extreme poverty. And he was really struck by this in New York, when he went to New York to see, and he's like, how does this happen? How is it that in an environment where we seem to be creating more and more wealth, yet extremes of poverty are growing as well,
such carnage?
And so he set about to try to kind of understand that. And he's interesting the way he did it. He didn't take, say, a purely intellectual approach. He took an observational approach, and he took you know, there's the classical stuff in economics about you know, land, labor, and capital as the basic components. He felt that there wasn't really what I would call an integrated understanding of that in the economic system. So I'll give you sort of trying to bring this sort of home to you today, is to say, you know, we're sitting in a downtown location in Toronto, and for example, the land here is very valuable. I use an example also of, everybody knows in Toronto, Honest Ed's, right? It was a site that was sold fairly recently for redevelopment for like $100 million or something in that realm. 150 years ago, that land cost zero, right? So how does it get from zero to $100 million? What's this, the land we're sitting on right here could be, you know, a few $100s a square foot if you wanted to actually buy it. How does it get to be like that, right? So, I mean, if it gets to be like that because people congregate together, right? We build infrastructure, we build roads, we build bridges, then we build schools, we build hospitals, we build all kinds of things. People want to congregate in big cities. So as people congregate in big cities, it's the old real estate mantra, it's all about location, location, location. So what George started to recognize is there's kind of two kinds of income, right? There's the income that we work for. You and I go out and we do our jobs every day. We expend energy, we perform a service, and we get
a paycheck.
We get a paycheck for that service. Now, after a while, where does all that money sort of flow, right? So after a while, what you start to realize is after a certain point, some of it obviously goes to our wages, the wealth that we create. Where does the rest of the wealth sort of go? Well, a large amount of it tends to go into what we would call the value of land. So land has gone, a piece of land that was worth nothing in 1850 is now worth 100 million. And what created that value becomes another question, right? Because it's not by the sweat of our brows, or even Honest Ed, God bless him, it's not by the sweat of Honest Ed's brow that that land became worth $100 million. It was everything that happened all around
it. So
right?
that means those people contribute to the increase of this.
The whole community in a way, and what creates the infrastructure, the community through taxation, right? So the whole thing, that what starts to happen in any kind of economy, when you start at a very simple level, land has no value, you go to the middle of Toronto, or we were just talking earlier, a value of a square mile of land in Manhattan today is something like $16.5 billion for a square mile of land. You know, this area sort of between sort of Sinclair and the
no wonder Trump says I am rich, very rich.
I'm rich, yeah.
Well, no, he'd like to.
You know, so the interesting question is that there's a lot of rich people in the world, and the question that can be asked is that through earned income or unearned income, right? So one of the cores one of the core ideas that George started to understand was the huge preeminence of land values in terms of the economy, and the enormous wealth flows into land values, right? Now, that's sort of the land side of the equation. We'll talk about land, labor, and capital.
Yes.
You know, the common assumption we have is that if we work harder and we work more productively, our wages will go up, right? That's the common assumption.
It's a myth.
But there's an enormous amount of people working in the service industries and in the downtown cities who could never in a million years afford to live here. And you see that more and more. I travel a lot, and I often talk to waiters or barmen or whatever, and I say, you know, where do you live? And like, they never live here. They always have to live, because the wages they make, they could not possibly afford to live in these locations. So why is that, right? Why is that? Because land, as we say, is fixed in its entirety. The globe is the globe. Our desire to live in certain areas increases, so that land value increases. Wages at the same time works on a different operation. Our wages essentially fall to the level of which somebody is least willing to work for. So if somebody down the road decides that my job that I may be getting paid, say, $50 an hour, and they come in the second, do the same job for 40, I'm out. The new wage is 40, right?
Which we see in recent...
So the challenge becomes, in a society as it starts to develop, you see less and less of the wealth, as it were, created wealth going to labor. Wages are pushed downwards, right? And more of that wealth is captured in the land. So it's kind of like he who owns the land controls the system in a very broad way. Now, there's more than just land, but land is the sort of the elephant in the room, right? So is that...
And the capital part? You said the land, labor, and the capital.
Land, labor, and capital. So
and then John, I think, has a question.
Go ahead.
Again, capital has become a very big deal again, because the assumption that you need capital to do stuff, right? If you want to build a subway, you need capital. So capital is kind of defined as wealth that is used to create more wealth. It's our stored up wealth. It's what we can sort of take and implement in a project. So
which probably buying in another land.
Which is buying another land. So that's where capitalism the idea of capitalism comes.
So it's catch-22. If you have capital or land,
or if you have land, you can accumulate capital, which will then help you to increase your land, so that's how the rich get richer, so to speak.
In a manner of speaking, yes. That's kind of how it all works.
No, that sets the skew.
Yeah.
So exactly, and I think, that, therein lies the problem of the quote-unquote capitalist system, which has to be distinguished from the free market system, in the sense that the Georgia system is not a capitalist system in the same sense that we have, and yet it's a free market system.
Yes.
So here, with Georgism, is addressing this, central issue. So how would they do it? Like, what would be the mechanics? So let's just say we were to take a look at this block.
Yeah.
How would we then be apportioning this the wealth of this block out?
So I'll take an example, which is obviously top of mind in Toronto today or in the metro areas. It's the whole idea of transit, right?
Mm-hmm.
When our current mayor was before he was a mayor, he was a talk show host at one of the stations.
CFRB, yes, I know.
Yeah, and he posed an interesting question one day. I sort of an interview or a survey had come out like that. Something like 93% of the people in Toronto are in favor of transit, right? And he says, like, that's a remarkable statistic. You can't even get 93% of the people to agree that today is Monday, which is what the day was, right? But then he said, the challenge becomes then when you said, like, who pays for it, the numbers then shift. Like, there's a lot less people in the GTA who says we should pay for it. They say it's like the federal government should pay for it, the provincial government should pay for it. In other words, somebody else should pay for it, or at least a portion of it. So the point being he's making, he says, folks, I got news for you. The bill's always going to come back to us, but I want to throw that question out. So I was driving in my car. I couldn't get through that day, but my sort of response in a way to the question was, you actually might be asking the wrong question, right? It's not how do we pay for the subways. It's how do we capture the value that the infrastructure of a subway will bring, okay? And this has been sort of highlighted in a few areas, and I'll come back to it in a second. But so what happens when you build a subway? What happens when you build any infrastructure that's useful?
People,
right?
market.
So I use the example of living out in Etobicoke. Let's say, for example, somebody decides they're going to build a subway line on Lakeshore, or even a rapid transit line. And so today it takes me 40 minutes to get downtown from there using public transport. Actually, it takes an hour. But let's if you put in a rapid transit or a subway, maybe it'll take half an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So what effectively that transit system has done is created a condition where it takes half the time to get there. Or in effect, it's like as if my house was halfway closer to the center of the city than it is now. The value of the land goes up, right? So let's say a house there or a property there, let's just for argument's sake say it's $800,000 or $700,000 for a property. Let's say the house is worth 200 or 250. Let's say the land is worth 500. So we'll say a house is worth 200, land's worth 500. Suddenly you build a subway, what happens? Land prices go up. 550, 600, 700. They go up even in advance of the subway because people know, right? This is going to be more valuable now. More people will want to live here. So what happens is all along the subway lines and close to the subway lines, the value of land increases, right? The Jubilee line was built in London many years ago, a big subway line, £3 million, I think, 3 billion, excuse me, pounds. Somebody did an estimate that if you looked at the land values that was created as a result of that subway expansion, within 1,000 meters of the subway line, it came to something like $13 billion increase in land value.
So ROI was worth it.
Absolutely, the subway in large cities is a complete no-brainer. Like
not to mention the environmental impact, not to mention the health impact, not to mention the concentration.
Let's go back to the example exactly, because it's best with these types of things to bring it down to the micro, which you have done. So we've got that line,
right,
and now we've got value. Immediately, we've got value for all those homes.
Right.
That have increased, okay? Right. Plus we have the businesses that are running to those bins, and we have all that sort of multiplier effect. So how would we capture that in a Georgia system?
Right, and it's actually in many ways it's quite simple. But what the first thing we need to recognize is when we talk about a property, there's two things there. There's the house and the land. Now, the house was built with labor. Right, wealth. So it was created by labor, okay? And so again, I'll use the example of the house being worth $250,000. That's what it cost for a builder to build it, materials, profit, etc. The rest of the value, the 500, we'll say, goes into the land.
Land.
Now, when the price, when the values escalate, it's not the house
No,
building
the
price,
land-
it's the land value that escalates. So a very simple thing will be to implement a land value taxation. So what you begin to do is, the current system today, unfortunately, Ontario doesn't recognize the building and the land as separate things. It lumps them all in together. But you could, in theory, simply separate those out. So when you get your assessment every year, it says your house is worth X and the land is worth Y. And so what you would do here is, in this understanding, you tend to leave labor alone. And we'll talk more about that. In fact, labor on wages and taxation like that should tend to zero, right? Don't tax.
Because they're actually not taking up any of
They're not
the
taking up-
resource.
There's a couple of reasons for it. One,
And they're not going up neither.
they're not going up.
Because
either.
because they come in and they
Yeah.
leave.
Yeah.
They're
So-
transient, yeah.
So you don't tax labor, you don't tax the products of labor ultimately. You'd have to have a transition in this, because there'd be
Are
too
we
much.
talking about the removing income tax kind of a thing?
Yes.
Okay.
So we'll come back to that in a
Okay.
second. So let's go with this idea. So as land values escalate, so the city then has a taxation, and they have what we will sometimes call a split tax.
Mhm.
In some places where they've implemented this, they would say, okay, we'll have a certain percentage on the building, and we'll have a much higher percentage on the land, right? So
Okay.
let's take the example again of the house at 250 and the land at 500. So let's say the house gets taxed, just for argument's sake, at 1%, and the land gets taxed at 4%. It's a different gearing. It could be 2 or 4. But let's say it's 4. So your taxation bill would be 1% of 250,
Which is to $2,500.
and 4% of 500, which is
$10,000.
$20,000. So it'd be
For 20,000.
20,000.
Yeah.
But I'm just using this as
No,
an
no, I
example. Don't
understand.
get freaked out by the numbers, because
No, I'm just
there's
using
another
that
side to
number,
the
yes.
equation. So what you're effectively doing is you're putting the taxation only on the land. So as the land values increase, the taxation increases, and that's what pays for the
And
subway.
plus, the house by itself depreciates anyhow.
The house, exactly. The house by itself depreciates. There are variations on this theme. Like in some ways they say, well, we'll just tax businesses, right? We'll just tax the land for business. There are variations on this theme, but the principle essentially is that good infrastructure raises land values. So by much more than typically the cost of the infrastructure over time, much more. So what you do is you tax back a portion of that increase of land value that automatically pays for the infrastructure, and then you have the infrastructure essentially for free. So the role of the city is just to finance the operation initially, to provide the initial capital to finance it, and then it
And
taxes
pays
it
it back as it comes.
This
Well,
being
this-
said, variations of this are being talked
Yeah.
about, and this idea was part of the Golden Report, but I think it's kind of watered down. They talk about tax increment financing, so when developers are building a high-rise near the subway, they'll tax back a certain portion. My thing is keep it simple. Just apply it on the land
Yeah,
values.
yes, you can
changes
play
your
with
view.
that percentage.
Yeah.
You can put it either 1% up or 1% down
Yeah.
over the future income.
But
and
how exactly? That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
In other words, it would improve the situation, ameliorate the situation right off the bat.
Right.
Right? But would it really fully address that problem that you identified, which is this huge accumulation where, what happens is it's almost like as you get ahead of the game right now, if you own property in Toronto, basically you're going to get returns through rent and everything like that to renting it out, etc. You maintain your wealth. But if you don't own property, you don't own a house, you just can't get to a position where you're going to have one. And so you end up having this sort of two-class society which becomes more and more skewed. How would this address that?
Yeah.
Would it go that far?
It would. So I've given you a particular case in point, which is the infrastructure of a subway where this would apply. So let's say we broaden this out a little more, and you talk about it in a very general context. So in this very general context, one of the things that George or many others talked about was the idea of economic justice. So if you think about economics, it's very simple. A simple definition of economics is often said, is to be the laws that govern the creation and distribution of wealth. So it's about the laws.
It's very
creation,
simple.
Yeah, it's just about laws, creation, distribution of the wealth, and the laws that govern it. Now, it does lead to a couple of interesting questions, like what wealth is, because we sometimes confuse wealth with money, right? We take money is a paper, it's a token, right? It's supposed to represent, it might not. But that's the idea with, so George's idea is how do we create wealth well, effectively? Because back in his day, remember, wealth creation was a big deal. There was still a lot of poverty around. I don't think wealth creation is as big a deal today as it was then, but it's still a big deal. How do you create wealth effectively, and how do you distribute it well or responsibly? And how? So when I back all of this up, I say we're less talking these days about production and creation of wealth, and we're more talking about distribution. So if we look at the idea of production first, though, George's idea was, why would you want to penalize people who want to work? So if you lay this out, income tax is a penalty on work. So income tax by its nature is a regressive form of taxation. Okay, you're saying to people, we want you to be creative, we want you to produce work or services, and now we're going to claw back a bunch of it. And the same idea applies to sales taxes, because sales taxes is also a product of labor. So then the question becomes, well, if you decide you don't want to do that, or you want to do less of that, where do you gain your income from in order to own the services? And so that's where he shifted this whole idea over to where does wealth go or in a society? Where does it rest at the end of the day? And more and more it rests in the value of land. Not just the value of land per se. We're talking about these days, I like to say to people, an acre of land or a square mile of Manhattan in 1600 was worth, very little. Today it's a bottle of whiskey. Today it's 16.5 billion a square mile. A piece of bandwidth was worth very, very little 50 years ago or 100 years ago. If you got to control a certain level of bandwidth on the spectrum, if you ask somebody 50 years ago how much they'd pay for it, zero. They'll pay a lot for it today, right? Because bandwidth is the new real estate in many ways, right?
Of course.
Okay, so it's got
and
enormous
it's monopolized
value.
Actually to some extent.
It's got enormous value.
It's a new limited resource.
Yeah.
It's a new other things that have great value. Like here's another thing, we want the world to be more sustainable, right? So we want people to conserve. So we're building, for example, if you want people to conserve energy, or if you want people to produce less greenhouse gases, or if you're running out of water and you want people to conserve water, there's a very simple way to do it. Price it, right? But people go crazy when you say, well, electricity costs are going up, my energy costs are going up. But my point here is these things are also resources, water, energy. They all come from the earth. They're all natural resources. So you can have a tax policy that sort of stimulates good behavior, and sort of in the relation to income tax, you have a policy that you keep income tax low because you want people to work. But you also, so you start to shift taxation away from income onto land,
which become
resources.
poor at the end, maybe for some family. Yeah.
Onto resources. So although it can be controversial when you say it initially, I say, like if the price of energy was 3 times what it is today, people would have a very different view. They do a couple of things. One, they think about conservation. That would affect how we build buildings. That would affect the types of cars we drive. It would cause changes in society. So we want to conserve. We want to conserve natural resources. We want to limit greenhouse gases. We want to do all these things well. So price those resources at a high level, make them valuable, right? At the same time, the income you derive from that, remove it away from income taxes to help people to become more creative. So what this is really talking about is a shift away from income and onto resources.
And instead of penalizing, you just rewarding someone.
Correct. And then now, I guess, what would be, I think, interesting is to explore the political aspects of this.
Yeah, I just
Because,
wanted to
because
get
of course, what immediately comes to mind, the next question is, who wins relative, and now ultimately everybody, if we were basically on an island and we were starting from scratch. But given our present status quo, who wins and who loses in a Georgia system?
Yeah, so who tends to win, I think, are the people at the lower end of the spectrum, right? Because what starts to happen is, and here's the fundamental reality here of this, is I would say, if I were to capture it in a sentence, is we believe that I believe if I own my house and I own the land that my house sits on, that's mine, right? And this is a common sort of belief. But whereas the house itself, yeah, it was labor that took to build it and it had a certain value. The land value was not created by me as an individual. The land value is created by community.
That's correct.
Okay, similarly, like the air that we breathe, you know, none of us created that. It's in common. Water should be in common. Resources, same thing in common. So the fundamental recognition here would be in relation to land is that land value is actually community value, not individual value. That's the big mind shift, I would say.
Well,
you have
you know
to
what
get
just
across
struck
to
me
do
is,
that.
isn't this, it's interesting, 19th century, which is a very Christian period of time when, you know, the Christianity was much stronger than it is today in a part of the world that dominated Europe and the States. This seems to be an extremely, you know, or an economic method that mirrors the Christian ethic much more closely than does, you know, Adam Smith's standard capitalism.
Yeah, my belief is applied, understood and applied properly. It's an inherently just system, because what it does is it recognizes the rights of the individual, and at the same time recognizes the rights of the community.
Mm-hmm.
The wars we're having today tend to be right versus left on the economic front. So you'll have one party, say in the US, you'll have the Democrats fighting for redistribution, right? Mm-hmm. And you have on the right people saying fighting for lower and lower taxation. We want to get rid of government.
However, even those Democrats, if you were to suggest what you're suggesting, those individual Democratic senators and everybody would have properties, and they themselves individually would be losing those properties. So I'm not sure even if today's left, as we have it, would actually be supportive of this.
Yeah, well, as you say, once you start to drill
once
down,
you know it's you paying for it, exactly like it's, as you said, who pays for it?
Yeah. So you know, a fella explained this. John Fisher sort of explained this to me one day. It's like you have this big taxation pile, right? And the left is trying to, in a way, is trying to increase it so you can distribute it more fairly, and the right's trying to decrease it because they're saying, hey,
that's my money.
I earned this. That's my money. Stay away from my money. What this understanding is saying is there's individual wealth and there's community wealth. The individual wealth is what we actually work for. And I think anybody on the right that's of a principle will agree that we should keep what we earn. That's, in fact, that's one of the principles.
The right or left even.
Well, no, but in particularly the right.
Particularly in the right. But the same token, in a just system, we should not keep what we do not earn. So what I say is the individual should keep what it earns, but the community should also get what is due to it.
So that begs another question. The libertarians, exactly as you said, in a way, this is a very interesting mirror to hold up to the right wing in particular.
Yeah.
Because they have the libertarian ethos, and that, you know, damn it, I earned all this, and you know, I'm entitled to what I earned, and that's, you know, that's why we came to America, blah, 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 right? In no way does this impugn that. It supports it. In fact, there would be no taxes whatsoever that they'd have to worry about. Yeah. And the thing is that then in asking them the question, well, but why should you be accorded anything on what is not yours? Isn't that actually fundamentally against the morality of it? So what I'm curious, my question after that wonderful speech was, what do the libertarians say? Because the libertarians have come up lately and they're very much in vogue, or, you know, these neo-libertarians or faux libertarians or whatever they are. What is their defense against what you're suggesting?
Well, I don't think there's a great
they
level of
dismiss it out of hand.
disagreement. Once people understand it, right? There's a great level. But I think here's what I see as a challenge. One of the challenges I think that happens is we always have this visceral feeling that the land is mine, right, or ours. There's a very strong pull. Obviously in society, there's a great deal of uncertainty today, and there has been in the past, and to have something you can call your own, right, and own is a very visceral sort of thing, right? So you talked about Adam Smith earlier, right? And Adam Smith, this idea of the invisible hand, right?
Yeah.
And I thought it was very interesting. I thought, just my own thinking, one of the great sort of ideas in terms of advancing wealth creation and per se capitalism was this notion that as individuals work away efficiently, they're creating this pool of wealth, and eventually we all gain from it. So even though
the Roman Empire is an example of that.
Even though I might have no interest in the wider community, by the very fact that I'm figuring out a way to do something more efficiently will eventually have benefit for everybody else. So people grabbed onto that idea and goes, yes, I can be individually assertive, and at the same time I happen, even though I don't necessarily intend it, it's doing good for the community. Now that idea is kind of
Bill Gates thinks like that.
Well, no, there's tenures.
It works absolutely up to a point,
to a
but beyond
point.
a certain point, if you don't understand what's going on, it starts to flip the other way. So one of the notions that sort of came to me was, you can take the same, you could take, okay, where are we at today? I'm saying, like, instead of the invisible hand, we should maybe consider the invisible heart, right? Okay, so it's just a play on this, but the idea is a recognition in here of what it is that we own and what it is that we don't own, and a willingness to sort of live in accordance
which goes
with
completely in different level of the psychology of the society and individuals.
Isn't that very interesting?
Yeah.
Exactly.
It is a spiritual approach.
Yeah.
It tends to move, and this is
Which mainly major philosophies and major religions that try to tell that don't attach yourself to the mundane,
Absolutely.
to the mundane things.
Probably the only economic system that I've ever heard of that actually could be thought of as being, in a way, at least aligned with the mystical principles.
Well, I think it's aligned. I think
it's not
aligned
focused on
when we talk
materialism per
about
se.
mystical or spiritual principles. I think in the end of the day, what we're talking about, do unto others as you would have done unto you, or love thy neighbor. These are the basic tenets of living in a community or living in a society in order for a society to function well.
But isn't it ironic, it's just an aside, that the best way for you to induce hatred of your neighbor is insisting that you love them?
Well,
Thank you for that.
No, but I was just thinking that, the Christians certainly are no better than anybody else in terms of loving their neighbor, yet they're the only ones who talk about it incessantly.
well, usually they, like Mark Twain say, people talk about things that they don't have.
Be careful. It's true. Yeah.
I want to bring two issues. You were talking about the attachment to the land,
Right.
and it's universal. By the way, it's not like Canadian thing or American thing.
Yeah.
It's very For instance, the best example is Palestine. This land is mine. It has been for centuries fight over that because this land is mine. Two things I want to ask you. Maybe you can shed some light on that. One is, let's say in Canada, up until recently, anyone who wanted to be senator, maybe even now, they have to hold a piece of land in this.
It comes from the old English system.
And that by itself create that kind of the diversity.
Absolutely.
And the second issue that I wanted to, probably you can tie them together, the issue of the income tax was introduced as a temporary measure in 29 when the Great Depression and all of that. Well, whenever they had It started actually in 1919, and then it went, and they say, okay, we want just this for they just recover from First World War, or we want to just compensate for the Second World War, and then it will go away. But it never went away.
Imagine that.
Okay. Now, when you the reason I brought these two issues together, because one is introduced by government, both of them introduced by government, and both of them retained by governments. So bringing this kind of the geoeconomics idea and putting dropping it on at the desk of the, let's say, prime minister or premier or mayor or whoever, and say, okay, this is the benefits, like a TTC, this is the ROI, which you get much more than that you're bargaining right now for last 30 years, negotiating and doing the study. Why they are resisting? Is it just a temporary income for themselves?
Well, I think again, it's one of those ideas. Like, interestingly enough, although I think we're all inclined towards this. How do you say this? It's there's a certain psychology of human beings. Okay, at this stage in the world, it's easier to make us a little bit fearful than it is to make us more loving, right?
Okay.
We tend towards fear rather.
Love your neighbor.
Just at the moment, right? I'm just saying, So what tends to happen?
What happens if he doesn't love you as much as you love him? Yeah.
We don't want to machete.
This is a view from the right.
Machete.
Just have a machete in case.
Exactly.
Preemptive.
Maybe I'm going to step into, but so let's. Here's another example. Let's say, and I was given a talk and to a group of people in the Unitarian Church, and I would say it's a fairly mature audience, So somebody then says, "Hey, wait a second, like I like what you're saying from a justice standpoint, but like, I'm living in my house in North York or whatever, and what you're saying to me now is, I'm going to have to pay a lot of taxes more on my house than I was paying before." And I said, yeah, but like, believe you me, the amount of taxation the society will pay overall will be a lot less. In other words, the flip side of how much less you'll be paying on the other side, you will see a big benefit. He was 70 years old. He's going, wait a second, I'm not earning any money anymore.
Yes.
So he'll have a visceral reaction against it from the standpoint of, it's like, this is not good for me right now. So then, of course, I go into the argument. I say, what's your house worth? What's the house land? $1 million, just using numbers again. What was it worth 40 years ago when you bought it? Oh, I got it for 100. Okay, so that's 900.
The capital gain.
So but I'm saying these are real reactions that people have. So how we're going through this stuff today in the world with all this with the climate change, etc. People are being asked to make decisions that they don't particularly like to make for the common good, and it takes a lot of education, a lot of understanding before people come to that understanding that if we're in this together, we all benefit.
There's another issue,
which
is the transition. If you're starting from scratch, right? You're on an island and you decide to institute this.
Yes.
Great. And you're making that argument to everybody, 70, 60 and everything, easy argument to make.
Right.
But when you're in the midst of the other system, where if you're 70 years old and all of a sudden you realize you can't afford your house and you're going to have to move, that's going to be absolutely traumatic to a huge number of people. So aside from even the huge, the fat cats and everything, even if we get that aside, it's going to be such a level of upheaval. What is the protocol for the transition?
Well, I think you most certainly have to have a transition, and I was looking. This is, if you don't mind here,
That's your transition plan.
This is the transition plan,
impressive.
exactly.
Hey,
and it's written on this side as well.
The blank,
exactly.
It is open to negotiation. But before you, I don't want to interrupt your train of thought. Please remember. But when you said both about the 70, I had a guest in different program that he suggested that property tax for a certain demography has to be based on the cash value, not based on what they have and living on it. For instance, when it comes to the 70 years old man who does not have any income, and he's not planning to sell his house to to make that capital gain.
Yeah.
Therefore, the property tax for this person should be lower because it is his primary.
I think you most certainly would have to do some kind of a transition, simply because you will have those situations. You may not have a lot of them. One of the arguments that's made is that, you know, if the value of the land on which your house is sitting on appreciated by $500,000 over the last 25 years, right? If you go back to my earlier point, and we accept that actually land value is community value, you could say to that person, look, maybe you should, you know, get a reverse mortgage on your house, and you can use that to pay back, because really, you know, it's community value. Now, you know, that is
then
the
you
just
are a
argument.
socialist.
Well, no, that's of course, yeah, of course, that would be absolutely. But I'm just saying, and it's like anything else in life, and this is the real challenge of this, is if we're to shift, you know, in our behavior, we need to shift first in our understanding. So, and as we shift in our understanding, we're going from what I will call me to
Us,
and
yeah.
us, and the circle enlarges. So as the circle enlarges, there's a greater willingness to allow for things that are good for the community. And at a certain point, you come to understand that if everybody's in this together, and everybody wins, right? Because I'll give you the example of, I don't know how much time we have, but
No time, we are 40
I
minutes.
think we have to discuss Georgist police as well. within that time.
So I tend to use
Police?
Yeah, I use this
And
kind of
secret
example, you know, because I found it helpful for myself to bring it down to. There's a principle level here. We're talking about the technicalities of this, but there's the psychology of it is enormous, right? The shift. So I would say, like, and you had this example earlier. Imagine if there was a whole bunch of us living on an island. Or on an island somewhere.
Yes, Toronto Island.
Or Toronto. So
That channel it was an island. Was an airship that just immediately took off.
But
Probably something I'm not the first one to think of that.
but let's assume further that island was somewhere in a very nice climate where people would like to go, right? So, and there's a beautiful beach on that island, and people obviously love to go to the beach. So there's one section of this island. So I don't know if any of you go on these vacations, you know, all-in vacations. You go off down to these beaches in the Caribbean or Mexico or somewhere.
I haven't had that.
But if you go,
have friends who have.
yeah, exactly. So some
First,
some
I have
will
to have
recommend-
one of those lands.
So here's what happens.
Terrible experience.
They have a nice swimming pool,
Yeah.
typically at the hotel, and there's a nice beach area.
Yeah, but they are using swimming pool.
Well, maybe, but the people come out in the morning.
let's not get sidetracked on that issue.
yeah, on the aquatic habits of the people. Yes.
This is a serious conversation. Let's not go into the prosaic.
Myself, I like the ocean, but
Okay.
you know, this is
all this is good and good, the Georgism, but let's get to the point. The pool or the exactly. Where's the rush going? How much are you going to value each?
So let's just go with the beach for the moment.
Yes.
So early in the morning,
You've got no pool.
the
We're making
guys
a really
go out
simple
and they
island.
lay down all these nice reclining chairs, and there's, say, 200 of them laying across the beach. And then people, you know, early birds wake up at dawn, and they go out there and they put a towel or a book or something. They block their spot, right? So what people want to do is they want to find a nice spot on the beach, you know, a bit of shade. Maybe it's close to the facilities, close to the bar or whatever. And the early ones go in and they put their, you know, books down and their towels down, and that gets them their spot. They hold that spot, right? So you walk out like at noon, like I will do, you know. I like to get up at noon, you know. It's just to see what the day looks like. And all the spots are gone. But when I go down there, you know, there's only maybe 25% of them are occupied, right? The rest has just got towels. In other words, what's happening is these spots are being held out of use, right, by people who are not using them. So we have this idea, we want to have a nice spot, I want it to be mine. So that's the human psychology at an individual level. I think to myself, you know, what would happen if we said, you know what, I'll just take the spot for how long I need it, and then I'll take it.
Like a
Chances are-
timeshare.
like a timeshare, right? But we don't tend to do that. We tend to want to hoard, right? It's a bit of our psychology. Now, but here's the thing. What if you change the rules of the game?
Should you go and get the towel that does not occupy and toss it away?
Right. So, well, no. Yeah, that's the way the Irish will
you
play.
could have,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
you have
Sergeant
George's
Justice.
police.
Shut up.
This is what,
So,
I like the police
so what
idea.
happens if you said, tell you what, instead of a free for all, and people will say, we'll put a little charge on every.
Oh,
everyone.
you apply some tariff kind of
So
thing.
you want to hold out a spot for a day, it's $10.
Yeah.
You want a really nice spot, it's 20. You want to sit out on the edge where it's free, and you fill your boots. So in other words, you apply a value to it that people ascribe because they like to be in the right spot. So now, and then what you do at the end of the day, you take all the receipts from all the thing, and you split it up amongst everybody, right?
Like BC does with the carbon tax.
That basic idea.
Yes.
So
Or
what,
pays for the infrastructure. For
See,
instance,
so what
that you build on
happens,
the
right?
island, yeah.
the
But
first
what
thing-
you just described is like remind me of the Hong Kong buyers who come to British Columbia, buy an apartment or condos, and go back and it stays empty, the same as those chairs.
Precisely. Now,
But they
the
bought it.
chair and the beach idea works all right so long as you have a small number of people in competition for lots of chairs, right? You live with it, right? I get annoyed when I get there and there's no spot for me, but I figure something happens. But more people come, suddenly people start to get angry, right? Like, why are you holding that spot? I want to sit, you haven't been sitting there all day. So here's the thing. So you put a little price on everything. Then at the end of the day you say, let's just divvy it up amongst everybody, right? So what happens in this scenario? What tends to happen is people then will still go for the nice spot, but they'll say, you know what, I'm not paying for it for the whole day because I just want it for 2 hours. So they pay for 2 hours and they move on. So
How
then
about-
what happens,
I've
right?
got an idea. How about like a VIP section on the beach, close to the bar and the sea, but it'll be they'll be winners of the Georgist of the Day prize. So the most giving
What
kind
is the
person.
Georgia
Well, you'll be the most giving individual.
Do you have a heavy blunt instrument? Because I'd like to make use of it at this point.
You see,
we
once
can
we-
do that after the show.
After
we
the
have
show.
plenty
That's
of
fine.
room
Sorry,
already.
I'm sorry.
No,
Not
okay.
live on
You're,
air.
you're talking about
Okay.
you're talking about a shillelagh.
Then-
That is only
But
useful
what
during
is
the
the issue of
transitional
this
phase.
policy?
So the policy here achieves a number of things. Number one, it means that everybody benefits from the. So what I'm saying is because the beach has value, the locations have value. If you apply a small rental or a rental cost and split it, everybody shares in the benefit. At the same time, people only use what they need, so therefore you can accommodate a lot more people. Or you can take a portion of every day's receipts as a matter and do improvements on the beach, which creates more value, right?
Like
So-
Section 37 is supposed to do.
So applying a simple rule of saying to people, look, this area has value, we'll charge for it, but we'll split it up for the whole community, has the immediate effect of increasing the fairness, number one, and the utilization, number two. The utilization, you can now have probably 3-4 times as many people utilizing that space as you had before.
Not to mention it takes care of those who complained about two-tier system because they get something at the end.
So you accomplish two things with one rule. You accomplish justice and efficiency, right? So these are touchstones, right? Which you can apply.
But it's not going to fly in a societies like Toronto or.
No, but so you look at the psychology of it, and you look at the psychology of it is it's very, very hard for people to trust that the spot will be there, right, in the beach for
And
them.
in this case, it's government to take care of this.
No, but no. I'm saying technically it's very simple, right?
Yes.
The rules are very simple. Okay, what I'm saying is we need to begin to appreciate at the level of the beach, right? Not the level of our little spot, right? The level of community.
Yeah.
So that's the psychological aspect of this thing, right?
I was thinking though, this reminds me of Chinese, bicycles in China, right? And I remember when we were first learning about China, we just thought, well, why is communism bad? Well, for one thing, everybody's got black bicycles, and look at the number of colors we have, and so just on any objective basis, any 12-year-old knows this is a better situation than theirs. But I remember when I spoke with someone who was from China and had direct experience, they said the whole reason why all the bicycles were the same color was that they were interchangeable. So you drove your bike to a place, there were always other bikes, and then you just picked up another one, you didn't know it was yours. So that nobody lacked a bike, right?
Right.
So everybody's going along and nobody's got it. So in the same sense, if we go back to the beach, and the people essentially, when you go down and you get there very early, much earlier than you otherwise would, so you can secure the seat. Because the idea is, it's a scarcity thinking, the idea is that, my God, if I don't do this, then the seats are taken up because everybody's hoarding, etc. But if everybody has the idea that there is enough, right, and that they have this, and it reminds me of a story that I saw once in Budapest University, in the Economics University in Budapest. There was this strange thing in the halls that the professors were all walking around with toilet paper, not hanging out, just rolls of toilet paper. And I couldn't help asking the person I was dealing with, this seems to be an interesting phenomenon. And he said, well, there's a story behind that. And he says, at one point there was a shortage of toilet paper in the city. So what people were doing is they figured that if there was toilet paper, they would take it for themselves because they didn't want to be left without. But then eventually the shortage disappeared. But the problem was that because they kept taking the toilet paper, it didn't matter how much supply they had, it was being hoarded. Right. And so that once that psychology was introduced, it couldn't be broken. So the question is, are we not really talking about not just rules, but entire psychology which somehow, which would be more effective in making this transition, in breaking through? Because in other words, why do I want it to be mine? Because in my head, if it's not mine, it's yours. It's the assumption is it has to be somebody's, and if it's always going to be somebody's.
Correct.
And then there's status associated with that.
Correct.
I think the main issue, just a phrase, the way that you describe the psyche of that is, I mean, most people confuse ownership with the element of control. Because we think we are wealthy, we have house, we have this, but in fact when we die, we are not taking them with us.
Right.
So it is just temporarily controlled from the period A to period B. Yeah. But we don't apply it to our daily life. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh no, but I think
we are going to the end of the program, and soon I want to have the last word from you.
Just I mean, we face obviously enormous challenges today, but one of the things that I like seeing coming out of these summits, right, is they're trying to figure out a way for people to work together on a global scale, and it's very, very challenging. But once that idea begins to take set, then this is just a subset in terms of the psychology of the idea. So you begin to see the world as the world, and we are all part of it, right? So you're sort of moving your psychology from almost, I would call, the head into the heart, right? And that really is the invisible heart, right? Exactly. So that to me is a huge part of it. There's the intellectual understanding, but at the end of the day, it's about love, right?
Do you believe that it happened in our lifetime?
I don't know what to believe anymore. Seriously, no. But I think elements of it, yes. It's taken.
We can't lose the hope, but
it's taking root, but not in a general way, but in specific ways. And yes, I believe if my challenge is if we don't have a community-based economics, we're in trouble.
You know, we have no choice but to hope for this.
Yeah.
No, there is a hope and try.
We're either going to come together or it's going to split apart. Like there's no kind of
we've
fuzzy
tried
stuff
the other
now.
way. Yeah, we know where it leads.
Yes.
Paraic, that was a very intense and very stimulating kind of the conversation.
I would like to say that Paraic has successfully raised the bar of this show for all future guests. I think we might have to terminate the program here.
We have a difficulty for the next show.
We're going to have to break for weeks to find anything comparable.
I'm sorry that I'm disappointed.
We're destroyed.
We have to.
I apologize.
Are you trying to say we have to quit while we are winning?
Yeah, I think this would be a good place to terminate the show, and then or at least we'll change the subject altogether. You know, it could be, let's say, selling little tchotchkes and things.
Or bicycles.
Or black bicycles. That would be my. This is a great segue.
I
didn't get to my free the accountant segment.
Oh, excellent. Well, we'll have you back then.
We will have you back.
The very fact that we might have Paraic back is already reason for us to continue.
Are you up to it to come back the New Year show?
Absolutely.
Still around.
Okay. Because on New Year show we will gather our direction based on
And we
what we are
gather
doing.
the absolute, 20 best guests of the
Yes.
year.
But we haven't get to the.
The second
Well,
best.
We have to
Do you have
but-
anything for any final thing to say? We
No, I'm
Okay.
done.
Okay. Thank you very much for being with us this Tuesday, December the 1st, 2015. And please visit our website. It's a basic website. Give you basic information about what we do and how we do it. And if you need our assistant, as John said, the Turnaround Duo is available either individually or together for your benefit.
And amusement.